I have delivered 2,483 children in my lifetime, but I will never forget that fateful night, the night I discovered the truth behind the son of the wealthiest man in town. I was just a 19-year-old midwife when I became entangled in the King Bull's forbidden love affair between a 16-year-old young wife and her husband's son from a previous relationship. When they knocked on my door at midnight with a newborn baby in their arms and fear in their eyes, I had to make a choice: reveal the secret or protect them from the wrath of the most powerful man in the region. This true story changed my life forever, transforming me from a simple midwife into the heir of an entire industrial empire. That was the price of silence, of compassion, and of standing on the thin line between right and wrong in a world where power and love intertwine in complex ways. I was born into a family with a midwifery tradition spanning 4 generations. My mother, Ardath Quill, learned the craft from my grandmother, Dorothea Quill, and I am the 4th generation to continue this sacred tradition. I vividly remember the feeling of fear when, at the age of 11, I first witnessed a baby's head emerging during birth. I barely slept that night. That fear made me swear to my mother that I would never marry, never wanting to experience the pain of childbirth. My mother was heartbroken to hear this, worried that I would break the family tradition. But when I was 13, on a hot summer night, I decided to give myself another chance. "Mother, may I come with you?" I asked when she was called to help Mrs. Amaryllis Lovelace deliver her 4th child. My mother's eyes lit up in a way I will never forget. That night, everything changed. The smells, the screams, the blood, they were all still there. But this time I wasn't terrified. I stood watching my mother's every move, the way she comforted the woman in labor, the way her hands seemed to know exactly what to do. And when the baby was born, its powerful cry echoing through the room, I felt something different. Not fear anymore, but passion. That was the true beginning of my midwifery journey. From then on, I followed my mother to every birth, learning every detail, every secret passed down through generations. Gradually, fear gave way to confidence, and I understood why my mother loved this work so much. My mother, Ardath Quill, learned the craft from my grandmother, Dorothea Quill, and I was the 4th consecutive generation of midwives in my family. Just imagine 4 generations of women bringing life into the world. It was a strong tradition passed from mother to daughter like a sacred secret. I was about 11 years old when my mother took me in a hurry to see a birth and help my grandmother. Iphigenia Quill did the same with her. But the first birth my mother assisted with was when she was just 9 years old. I'll never forget the first time I saw a baby's head emerging. Good heavens, I was so frightened that I barely slept that night. It marked me in a way you can't imagine. I kept telling my mother I would never get married. Do you know why? Because she always said that when we married, children would come, and after seeing all that, I didn't want to go through it. I was so afraid that I told my mother I didn't want to accompany her to births anymore. How sad she became, saying, "My daughter, you're going to break the cycle of midwives in our family." That hurt my heart, seeing my mother that way, disappointed. But I was just a frightened girl. I didn't really understand what was happening. I only knew I was afraid, very afraid. Once, I heard her telling her friend Philomena Wyndham that she would wait a while longer to take me along, that perhaps I was too young. And that's what happened. When she was leaving, she would ask if I wanted to go with her, and I always said no. My sister, Lorelei, didn't want to either. She was traumatized. She worked at the Foxfire Luminary Company, so Mother placed all her hopes in me. I could see the hope in her eyes every time she invited me. It was as if she had this fear of losing not just her daughter, but the entire family tradition. That weighed heavily on me. I felt guilty for disappointing her. Then, when I was 13, I decided to give it a chance, to see if my opinion had changed. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a hot summer night, and Mother was called urgently to help Amaryllis Lovelace, who was having her 4th child. I said, "Mother, may I come with you?" Her eyes lit up in a way I'll never forget. By that time, she wasn't even asking me anymore. She grabbed her bag, gave me a shawl to cover my shoulders, and off we went down the dirt road. When we arrived, the scene was intense, I won't lie. The smell, the screams, the blood. But surprisingly, I didn't panic. I stood there, observing every movement my mother made. How she calmed Amaryllis Lovelace, how her hands seemed to know exactly what to do. And when the baby was born, that strong cry filling the room, I felt something different. It wasn't fear anymore. It was fascination. I watched my mother holding that tiny thing, cleaning it, caring for it, and I thought, this is what I want to do. That night, walking home, I said to my mother, "Mother, teach me. I want to learn everything." She stopped in the middle of the road, hugged me tightly, and I swear I saw a tear roll down her face. That's how it truly began. From then on, I accompanied her to all births, learning every detail, every secret passed down through generations. Gradually, fear gave way to confidence, and I understood why my mother loved what she did so much. Then when I was 16, Mother finally let me handle a birth on my own. I remember every detail of that special day. It was a hot summer afternoon. The sun was setting when word came that Meredith Crowley at Crowley Ridge Farm was in labor, about to give birth. As usual, we left in a hurry. We arrived at the Crowley's house by nightfall. The strong smell of coffee, mixed with the aroma of herbs that Mother always brought, filled the room. Meredith Crowley was lying on an improvised bed in the living room, surrounded by women from her family. Her husband was pacing nervously back and forth. Mother assessed the woman's condition carefully, said it would be straightforward. But I already knew too. I could tell just by touching her belly what position the baby was in and by checking the dilation. Still, my heart was pounding when Mother said, "Zephyrine, this one's yours." When she saw how young I was, Meredith Crowley became afraid of me delivering her baby. Her eyes widened, and she squeezed her mother's hand, but my mother, with that calming voice only she had, reassured her, saying she would be right beside me if needed. I saw confidence return to Meredith Crowley's eyes, and that gave me strength. I stood beside her, smelling the mix of sweat and fear, touched her belly, feeling the baby's movements. "Everything's fine," I said, trying to convey confidence, and I began to work. The hours passed slowly. I guided Meredith Crowley to breathe with each contraction. Her body curved, and sweat dripped down her forehead. I could smell the strong scent of rosemary that my mother had burned to purify the environment. The whole time I felt her gaze upon me, but it wasn't a look of concern, it was pride. Then finally, I saw the crown of the head appearing. My heart raced, but my hands were steady. Gently, I guided that little head out. "Push, Meredith Crowley," I said. "It's almost there." And suddenly, in a magical moment, the baby slipped into my hands. Oh my goodness, how beautiful it was to see and hear that little cry. It was a girl, strong and healthy, with a head of black hair, just like her mother. "It's a girl," I announced, and the room erupted in joy. The father, who had been nearly fainting from nervousness, began to cry with happiness. I cut the umbilical cord as Mother had taught me, cleaned the little one with a soft cloth that my mother handed me, and gave her to her mother. "Her name is Rose," Meredith Crowley said with tears in her eyes. The room was full, all the relatives wanting to see little Rose. The baby's father was overjoyed. It was their second child. Afterward, I took care of the placenta, removed it carefully, and gave it to the husband to bury, as was customary. Mother had taught me the significance of the placenta, how it represented the cycle of life and needed to be treated with respect. Burying it was our tradition, a way of honoring what had nourished the baby and returning it to the earth. While Meredith Crowley's husband went out to bury the placenta, I stayed there, caring for her and little Rose. I helped her breastfeed for the first time, watching that tiny thing latch onto her mother's breast with strength. At that moment, I looked at my mother. She was leaning against the doorway, watching me with a smile on her face. I knew I had done well, had honored my family's tradition, had brought a life into the world with my own hands. We left there in the early morning, and in the old Studebaker truck, Mother gave me a broad smile. The sun was rising as we returned home, and I felt different. I wasn't a girl anymore. I was a real midwife. That's when Mother took out a small cloth bundle that Mr. Crowley, the baby's father, had given her before we left. She unwrapped it carefully, and I saw that it was some dollar bills and coins. "Look here, my daughter," she said, her eyes shining. "This is your first payment as a midwife. But then, look how you got yourself all dirty." I looked down and saw that my clothes were all stained with red. My hands and arms were clean. I had washed them well before leaving. But my dress, oh, that was a horror, dirty all the way to the hem, and that was with an apron and towels. We burst out laughing right there in the truck. "One day you'll be able to deliver a baby without getting a speck of dirt on your clothes, my daughter," Mother said in that knowing way of hers. I nodded, thinking to myself that it would take quite a while before I became as good as she was. In those days, things worked differently, you know. There was no such thing as health insurance or paying with a card. It was all based on trust and what people could give. Mother continued explaining that payment varied greatly. Sometimes it was in cash, as on that day. Other times we received payment in the form of food, a chicken, some eggs, a bag of beans. Some families paid with services too. Mr. Thompson, the carpenter, once made a new table for us in exchange for the birth Mother attended for his wife. "The important thing," she would say, "is that we never refused to help someone because of money. If the family couldn't pay, we went anyway." I remember being impressed by the amount in that little bundle. It seemed like a lot to me, but Mother explained that it was because it had been a long birth that had lasted all night. "This is yours," she said, handing me the money. "You did the work. You deserve it." I was speechless. It was the first time I had earned my own money, the fruit of my work as a midwife. I felt such pride. Mother continued explaining how things worked. We never charged a fixed amount. Each family gave what they could. The wealthier ones usually paid more, and that compensated for when we attended to poorer families who couldn't pay anything. She told me that sometimes, in more affluent families, besides payment in money, we would receive gifts too, a nice shawl, a new pair of shoes, things like that. But the most important thing, she always said, is the respect and trust we earn. That's priceless. That morning, returning home with my first payment in my pocket and my clothes all dirty, I understood that I had chosen not just a profession, but a way of serving the community, of being present in the most important moments of people's lives. And I also made a promise that eventually I would leave births with my clothes as clean as my mother always managed to do. When we arrived home, after a relaxing and well-deserved bath, Mother and I went straight to the kitchen. We lit the old Ozark wood stove and began preparing a special meal. The delicious smell filled the house as we waited for the rest of the family to come home from work. Mother had an air of someone keeping a secret, and I could hardly contain my excitement. First came my sister Lorelei. She entered with that little smell of phosphorus she always brought from the Foxfire Luminary Company. Looking tired, but soon became curious about the activity in the kitchen. Then my two younger brothers, Fenwick and Thornton Quill, arrived, sweaty and tired from the harvest. They came straight to the kitchen, attracted by the aroma. Last came Father, with that quiet way of his. He took off his hat, hung it by the door, and came slowly to the kitchen, sniffing the air with a little smile at the corner of his mouth. Mother asked everyone to gather around the table. Before anything else, she said, "Let's give thanks first. Zephyrine, my daughter, you say the prayer today." Caught by surprise, I joined my hands and began, "Lord, we thank you for today's food and for all the goodness you give us. Bless our family." I paused, looking at my mother. She nodded her head, encouraging me, so I continued, "And I thank you for giving me the strength to perform my first birth alone today." That's when the kitchen exploded in surprise and joy. Lorelei nearly knocked over her chair. She jumped up so fast to hug me. The boys began to clap and shout, "Hurrah!" And even Father broke into an ear-to-ear smile. "I'm proud of you, daughter," he said, giving me a tight hug. My face was hot with embarrassment, but inside my heart was bursting with joy. Everyone wanted to know how it had been, asking 1,000 questions all at once. Mother served the food. There was Appalachian vegetable stew, rice, a free-range chicken she had been saving for special occasions, and even a peach cobbler, which was my favorite. We feasted, talked, laughed. I told them about the birth, how difficult but wonderful it had been at the same time. That night remains in my memory as one of the most special of my life. It was the day I truly became a midwife, not just through my actions, but through the recognition of my family and the payment we received. And so, with a full stomach, a warm heart, and a blessed soul, I went to sleep that night, knowing that a new phase of my life had begun, a phase of responsibility, of caring for others, but also of great joy and fulfillment. I could hardly wait for the next birth, for the next life I would help bring into the world. Look, after that first birth, things weren't quite as I thought they would be. I thought Mother would let me do everything on my own, but not at all. It seems that after that day, only complicated births appeared. Every time they called us, it was a more difficult situation than the last. Mother thought it better for me to remain more as her assistant, learning rather than doing things alone. At first, I admit I was a bit upset, but I soon saw that Mother was right. Goodness gracious, how many complicated cases appeared. There were births that, if not for Mother's experience, I don't know what would have happened. I remember well, one time we arrived at a house, and the woman had the baby's cord coming out. Umbilical cord prolapse, Mother explained. Oh my, what a fright I had. Mother, with that calm of hers, went right to work. She taught me that this was serious, that the baby could suffocate if the cord got compressed. She asked me to hold the baby's head while she tried to push it back inside. If we did nothing, the baby could die suffocated. We did what we could. Mother stayed there with her hand inside the woman, holding the baby's head to prevent it from compressing the cord. I prayed quietly, asking the Blessed Virgin to protect that child. It was a long and difficult birth, but in the end, thank God, the baby was born crying strongly. Mother always said that each baby's cry was music to her ears, and that day she even left with her clothes all dirty. Sometimes it worked out. Other times we had to deliver the baby as it was, with great care. I remember once when Mother spent hours trying to turn a baby, but it wouldn't turn. We prayed a lot. In the end, the baby was born bottom first, but thank God it was big and strong. Mother was relieved, but very tired. In these difficult hours, we used everything we knew, the knowledge that Mother had learned from her grandmother and mother, and that she now passed on to me. We always carried our bag full of herbs, cinnamon tea to help with contractions, chamomile to calm the mother's nerves, and rue for cases of bleeding. Goodness, how precious those teas were. Mother also taught me various positions to help with the birth. Sometimes we put the woman in a squatting position or on all fours, depending on how the baby was positioned. There was always a rope or cloth hanging from the ceiling for the woman to hold on to when pushing. It was the natural way, how our grandmothers did it, and each family had its customs, you see. Some wanted to bury the placenta in the yard, saying it would bring luck to the baby. Others kept the dried umbilical cord, saying it protected the child. We respected all of this because it wasn't just the body that needed care, but the soul too. Mother always said that each birth was a lesson, and it was true. We learned to recognize the signs of danger, to feel when the baby wasn't in the right position, to know when it was time to send the mother to the city hospital. But we also learned to trust in nature's remedies and in the power of faith. It wasn't easy. There were days when I cried from exhaustion and fear. But then Mother would take my hand and say, "My daughter, we have a gift. God and the Blessed Virgin chose us to bring life into the world. We cannot falter." And you know what? She was right. Each time I saw a mother embracing her child for the first time, or heard the cry of a baby we had helped to be born, I knew I was on the right path. It was difficult, it was risky, but it was what God had prepared for me. We were there not just to bring the baby into the world, but to care for the mother, the family, to respect traditions, and to pass on the knowledge that our ancestors had left for us. Mother told me stories of the old births that would make your hair stand on end. I'll tell you some that have stayed in my memory. There was once a woman who squeezed her husband's hand so hard during contractions that she broke all his fingers. Poor man. And that wasn't all. There was a woman who bit her husband's arm with such force that she left scars from her teeth marks. Mother said it was nature acting, the force of life wanting to come into the world. I laughed, but inside I was impressed. If you're a mother and had a natural birth, you know well what I'm talking about. It's a pain that can't be explained. Only those who've been through it know. But Mother always said that after the baby was born, it seemed like the woman forgot everything. It's one of life's mysteries. I remember one particularly impressive case. A woman was so strong that at the height of a contraction, she grabbed the headboard of the bed and tore off an entire piece of the wood. She stood there, holding the piece as if it were a war trophy. Her husband turned as white as paper, thinking about what all that strength could do to him. Mother always said that in our time, we already had luxuries, you see, electric light, running water, things that in my great-grandmother's time weren't even dreamed of. Once, in the middle of a pitch-black night, my great-grandmother was called to a birth. She had to help a woman give birth in a barn because there wasn't time to reach home. Just imagine There, in the midst of straw and animals, she balanced the Aladdin glass oil lamp as best she could to see, but the woman was in such pain that during a stronger contraction, she kicked the little light. The lamp tipped over, the kerosene spilled, and in the blink of an eye, the hay caught fire. It was sheer desperation. My great-grandmother didn't know whether to help the woman or put out the fire. She ended up doing both at the same time, shouting for the woman's husband to bring water while she continued with the birth. In the end, thank God, the baby was born well, and the fire was controlled, but the fright was great. There were also times when she had to cross swollen rivers because of rain to reach the more distant farms. Once, the canoe almost capsized in the middle of the journey. She clutched the midwife's bag with all her strength and prayed to the Blessed Virgin. And it wasn't just the births that were hard work. Sometimes she was called to care for sick people too. During a yellow fever epidemic, she spent days and nights caring for an entire family, barely sleeping, eating what she could. Another story that marked me was the birth of twins that happened during a strong storm. The power went out at the critical moment. We had to work by candlelight and flashlights. When the second baby was born, lightning struck so close that it illuminated the entire room. It seemed like a divine sign. A story I'll never forget was with grandmother and great-grandmother. They told me about a woman who gave birth in the middle of a flood. It was the rainy season, and the river had overflowed, with water already reaching the houses. Everyone was fleeing in a hurry. Great-grandmother Dorothea and my mother were in a boat, helping to rescue people. Mother, who at the time was just a young girl learning the craft, was with great-grandmother. That's when they saw a couple in a desperate situation. The woman, Sibylla Merrick, was in the last days of her pregnancy, and her husband, Zachariah Merrick, had improvised a raft with an old door. They had tied ropes and empty gallons to the sides to help it float. They approached to help the couple, and that's when the labor pains began. Just imagine, there in the midst of turbulent waters with rain falling, Sibylla began having contractions. Great-grandmother didn't think twice. She jumped onto their raft. She said it could hardly be called a raft. Grandmother stayed in a boat nearby. There, on that old door, rocking in the floodwaters, with rain falling non-stop, great-grandmother delivered the baby. She had none of the things she usually used. No clean cloths, no hot water, nothing. She used what she had, her hands, her experience, and a lot of faith. The baby was born strong, crying loudly, as if wanting to compete with the noise of the rain. It was a boy. There, in all that confusion, looking up at the sky that wouldn't stop pouring water, great-grandmother Dorothea said, "This one can only be called Shepherd." And you know what? The name stuck. That boy was baptized Shepherd, and the story of his birth became legend in the region. These experiences taught me that being a midwife is more than a profession. It's a true mission. We need to be ready for anything, because when a life wants to come into the world, it comes, regardless of the circumstances. It might be on a soft bed or on a door floating in a flood. The miracle of life happens, and our role is to be there to receive, care for, and celebrate. And of course, if I were to tell all the situations that midwives have been through, we could be here for an eternity. Sometimes I think that if all these stories were collected, they would make an entire book full of adventures, emotions, and miracles. Share in the comments if you know any home birth stories, because nowadays most are in hospitals. My profession is scarcer than water in the desert. In the old days, most births were at home with the community midwife. Now, with so many doctors and hospitals around, we hardly see home births anymore. It's always interesting to hear these stories. They remind us of how things have changed over the years. The years passed, and when I was 19, I had already performed 5 births on my own. It was during this time that I met Percival Yarrow. He was 20 years old and was there at his mother's birth. Theodora Yarrow, good Lord, that woman was a case apart. It was her 17th child being born. To this day, that's the record for the most children we attended. I was the one who delivered the baby. Thank God, everything was straightforward, except for the umbilical cord, which was wrapped around the neck, but that was a situation I had faced before. Theodora Yarrow was already accustomed. Every year, a child. It seemed her babies slipped out like soap. There were times when we arrived, and she was already holding the baby. We just cut the umbilical cord, removed the placenta, and cleaned everything up. Mother and I had gone there in previous years, but this time was different. When the baby was born, I saw a young man I had never noticed before. It was Percival, Theodora Yarrow's oldest son. He stayed in a corner of the room, quiet, but paying attention to everything. After his little brother was born, he offered to bring clean water for us to wash our hands. It was just a moment, but when our eyes met, I felt something strange in my chest. I had seen many young, handsome men at births, relatives of the women who were giving birth, but he was different. I can't explain it exactly, but it was as if something had changed in the air. Of course, I didn't let anyone notice. After all, I was there as a midwife and had to maintain respect. But I confess I felt a bit awkward, something that had never happened before at a birth. I quickly focused on my work, caring for Theodora Yarrow and the baby, but occasionally I caught my eyes searching for Percival in the corner of the room. While I was arranging things, Percival stayed nearby, helping his mother get comfortable. We exchanged a few words, and that's when I discovered he was a foreman at the Foxfire Luminary Company, where my sister Lorelei worked. He said he knew her and even praised her work, saying Lorelei was one of the best employees. I felt all flustered, not just because he was complimenting my sister, but because he spoke in such a respectful way, and his eyes, good heavens, what beautiful eyes. But I quickly pushed those thoughts away. After all, Mother always said, a midwife can't get sweet on the men of the family we attend. It was an old rule to maintain respect, so I swallowed that feeling and concentrated on my work. Still, when I left that day, I took with me the memory of those eyes and that gentle voice. But to my surprise, that same week, Laura Lee came to tell me that her foreman had been asking about me. That young midwife who delivered his brother. She said he was so proud, telling everyone there how skillful I was despite being so young. He said he had never seen such a young and competent midwife. I was quite excited and at the same time embarrassed by the compliments. Mother, with that wisdom of hers, said it wouldn't be long before he showed up at our house to court me. I pretended not to care, but inside I was anxious. Sure enough, one Sunday afternoon, who should appear at our door but Percival, all dressed up with suspenders and a bouquet of flowers in hand. I was surprised and a bit awkward. He respectfully asked my father's permission to visit me. I confess I was quite nervous when he handed me the flowers and our eyes met again. I felt that same strange sensation from the day of the birth. We started dating, and it was as if the world had gained new colors. Percival was such a good, respectful man. He would visit me every Sunday, always bringing a little flower or a sweet. We talked about everything, and he always asked about the births I attended, always interested. Soon we were engaged, and before I knew it, we were planning our wedding. It all happened within about a year and a half. Everything was very simple, as we could afford. Percival had some savings and bought a small piece of land near the factory where he worked. While our little house wasn't ready, my parents, with all their kindness, let us stay at their house. Those months, living with my parents after being married, were special, but time passed and our house was completed. On moving day, I saw in Mother's eyes a mixture of joy and sadness. She hugged me tightly and said, "My daughter, since we won't be living together anymore, we won't be able to attend births together. It's time for you to go on alone." That caught me by surprise. I felt as if the ground had disappeared from under my feet. Delivering babies without mother, I felt devastated, afraid. But deep down, I knew she was right. I was a married woman now. I had to have my own life, my own practice. And it wasn't just me whose life was changing. By this time, my sister Lorelei had already married and moved away. Fenwick, my brother, had also found a wife and moved out. My parents' house, which was once so full of life and noise, was now becoming quiet. Mother was going through a sad phase. You could see it. She would say, "That's just how life is, my daughter. These are natural things. I left my mother's house, and now it's your turn to leave." Even understanding, it was difficult. Each time I visited, I saw that Mother was quieter, more thoughtful. Father remained the same as always, quiet, but his eyes seemed moister when we said goodbye. I remember the day I took my last things to the new house. Mother gave me her midwife's bag, the one I had seen since I was little. "Now it's yours," she said. "Use it with wisdom and love as I taught you." I left there with a heavy heart, but also full of hope. It was a new chapter of my life beginning. I was a wife, would be a homemaker, and would continue being a midwife. I looked back one last time before leaving and saw Mother at the window, waving. At that moment, I promised myself I would make her proud of me, that I would be the best midwife and the best daughter I could be, even from a distance. That's when everything changed in my life. I thought much joy would begin, but life had other plans, plans that announced dark times. That afternoon, the sky was heavy, as if even the clouds knew something important was about to happen. Percival arrived home like a hurricane, breathless, with wide eyes. He had left work early, something he never did, and came running to get me. "Zephyrin, for God's sake, come quickly," he said, the words coming out broken by his heavy breathing. "It's the boss's house, the factory owner's. Alaric Selkirk Sr.'s wife is having the baby." I felt my heart jump and get stuck in my throat. Rich people? Me, a simple country midwife, and without Mother, going to attend important people. My hands trembled as I picked up my bag, the one Mother had given me. "Help me, Blessed Virgin," I murmured quietly. The journey to the mansion seemed to last an eternity. When we arrived, I was open-mouthed. That wasn't a house, it was a palace. Enormous gardens, windows that shone like diamonds, an entrance door that seemed larger than my entire house. A maid received me, her face as pale as mine must have been. She guided me through endless corridors until we reached a room that was the size of my living room and kitchen combined. And it was there that I saw a scene I will never forget. Lying on a huge bed, covered with sheets whiter than clouds, was Willowdean Selkirk, the boss's wife. My God in heaven, she was just a girl. She couldn't have been more than 16 years old. Her round little face still had childlike features, but her eyes had the fear of a woman. Her husband, Alaric Selkirk Sr., a man who must have been old enough to be her grandfather, paced back and forth like a caged beast. Every now and then he would stop, look at the girl on the bed, and then at the clock, as if he could hurry things along. But what caught my attention most was a young man, probably about 20, who was sitting beside the bed, holding, Willow Dean Selkirk's hand. He introduced himself as Alaric Selkirk Jr., Alaric Sr.'s son. There was something in the way they looked at each other, something I couldn't quite explain. Alaric Sr., in a tone that didn't accept discussion, ordered his son and the two younger girls to leave the room. The little ones protested, curious to see where babies come from. I almost laughed, remembering how I myself had been frightened for days when I saw my first birth, and I was much older than they were. I was left alone in the room with Willow Dean Selkirk, Alaric Sr., and the maid, Lavinia Porter, who stayed to help me, and that's when things got really bad. The baby was in a breech position, and each contraction seemed to tear the poor girl apart. She screamed, cried, and I prayed quietly, asking the Blessed Virgin for strength. I remember, as if it were yesterday, Alaric Sr., with that deep voice of his, asking Percival if I really knew what I was doing. My heart froze, but Percival, God bless that man, answered with a confidence in me that I didn't even know he had. "Yes, sir," he said. "Zephyrine has a lot of experience. She delivered my youngest brother, and mind you, he came with the cord wrapped around his neck. She saved his life." He paused and continued. "Despite being young, she has been working for many years with her mother, Ardath Quill, who is a reference throughout the town. There isn't a woman around here who doesn't trust them to bring their children into the world." My goodness, hearing that, I felt the weight of responsibility fall on my shoulders like a ton of bricks. It was as if suddenly I was aware of all the lives that depended on me at that moment. Young Willow Dean Selkirk, the yet-to-be-born baby, and even Percival's future at the factory. My hands began to sweat, and for a moment I felt too small for it all. But then I remembered my mother's words, "My daughter, your hands were blessed by God to bring life into the world. Never doubt that." I took a deep breath, determined to do my best. It was hours of struggle. I was sweating, my hands slippery with blood and other fluids. Willow Dean Selkirk, poor thing, fought with a strength I didn't expect from someone so young. And finally, when I was almost losing hope, I heard the most beautiful cry in the world. It was a boy, chubby and strong as a bull. Bastion, they said he would be called. Alaric Sr. cried like a child, kissing his young wife's sweaty forehead and holding his son in his arms as if he were the greatest treasure in the world. And for him, he was. But while I cleaned everything and cared for Willow Dean Selkirk, I couldn't get out of my head the look I had seen between her and Alaric Jr. There was a secret there, I was certain, a secret that could destroy that entire family. Alaric Sr. paid us very well for the service, more than I had ever received in my life. But what truly surprised me was the request he made afterward. With that serious manner of his, but with a voice full of concern, he called me aside and said, "Mrs. Quill, Willow Dean is very young and her parents live far away. She needs female support at this time. Could you come twice a week to teach her things, changing diapers, breastfeeding, those motherly things?" I was surprised by the request. You could see that despite the age difference and his stern manner, he truly loved and cared for his young wife. I accepted immediately, of course. After all, it wasn't every day that one gets such an opportunity. So it was agreed that I would go to Selkirk Gables twice a week. I would teach Willow Dean everything about caring for a newborn, how to change diapers properly, the best positions for breastfeeding, how to burp the baby, all those things one only learns through practice. I left there that day with my head full. On one hand, happy to be able to help and earn extra money that would make quite a difference in our home. On the other, with a strange feeling. Something told me this story wouldn't be as simple as it seemed. Little did I know how much this decision would change my life and involve me in the secrets of that family. Well, I think I had been around my mother so long that I found myself thinking like her. Usually, what I thought ended up happening. I found myself proud of this. I always thought my mother was so wise. The truth is, my intuition about Willowdean and the boss's son was confirmed the very first day I went to the mansion to teach baby care. When Lavinia Porter guided me to the couple's room, I saw a scene that confirmed my suspicions. Alaric Jr., that handsome young man, son of Alaric Sr., was there, sitting beside Willowdean's bed. The two were chatting animatedly, laughing quietly, and looking at the baby with an affection that went beyond normal for a half-brother. When they saw me, they immediately tried to hide it. Alaric Jr. jumped up as if he had received a shock, and Willowdean suddenly became serious. But I had already seen enough, that look between them, the way they were close. I pretended not to understand, of course. After all, who was I to meddle in family matters? But I couldn't help thinking about the confusion this could cause. Alaric Sr., who seemed to love his young wife so much, had no idea that his own son, oh my God, what a complicated situation I had gotten myself into. At that moment, as I began to teach Willowdean how to bathe little Bastian, I felt the weight of the responsibility I had assumed. It wasn't just about caring for a baby. I was in the middle of a secret that could destroy lives, and worse, I had no idea what to do with this information. I tried to probe Willowdean whenever I had a chance. I would casually say things like, "Your stepson really likes Bastian, doesn't he?" But she always found a way to change the subject, evading with a skill that surprised me for someone so young. I spent almost the whole day at the mansion, and gradually I realized that Willowdean was a good mother. She quickly picked up the things I taught her and had a way with little Bastian. Sometimes, when she was nursing the baby, we would talk about life. It was during one of these conversations that she confided something that left me dumbfounded. In a low voice, almost a whisper, she told me that her parents had sold her to Alaric Sr. when she was only 13 years old. Just imagine a girl, practically still a child. She said he paid dearly for her and that her parents barely said goodbye, only thinking about the money they would receive. My heart ached when she talked about her family. There were 9 siblings living in poverty. For them, selling their daughter to a rich man seemed the only way out. I found myself thinking about how cruel life can be sometimes, how people can do terrible things thinking it's for the best. But what intrigued me most was when she said, in a voice that showed no emotion at all, "Alaric Sr. is a good husband." I wondered what she meant by that. Did she really believe it? Or was it what she needed to believe to move forward? I left there that day with my head full of questions. How did a girl so young deal with all this? The arranged marriage, being a mother so young, and on top of that, the story with her stepson that I suspected. It was too much for one person to carry. What I began to notice as the days passed was that when I arrived at the mansion, Willowdean would light up completely. It was as if a sun had risen just for her. Gradually, we became true friends. I think I was the only friend that poor thing had in her entire life. Every time I appeared, she would come running, hug me, and kiss me on the cheek, as if I were a long-lost sister. Perhaps it was because I was young too, you know. She must have felt a connection, a friendship she never had a chance to have before. We talked about everything. She told me about the dreams she had before getting married, the things she liked to do when she was a girl. I saw in her eyes a mixture of gratitude and relief at having someone to talk to, someone who didn't judge her. And I confess, I also began to care for that young mother. It was impossible not to care about her. But when the postpartum period passed, those first 40 days after birth, that's when something horrible happened. It was late at night. Percival and I had already retired. The silence of the night was only broken by the chirping of crickets outside. Suddenly, we heard clapping at the gate, so loud it seemed they wanted to knock down the house. All the dogs started barking like crazy. We jumped up, hearts almost coming out of our mouths. Some neighbors also appeared at their windows, frightened by the noise. But seeing it was at our house, they soon went back inside. They were used to it because I was a midwife. There was no set time for them to call me. When I saw who was at the gate, I nearly fell over backward in shock. There were Willowdean, Alaric Jr., and baby Bastian, all looking as if they had seen a ghost. I quickly ushered them inside before some curious neighbor decided to appear again. As soon as I closed the door, it was as if a dam had burst. The two began to speak at the same time, words coming out jumbled, mixed with crying and sobbing. Willowdean clutched the baby as if her life depended on it. Alaric Jr. was gesticulating like a madman. Percival and I looked at each other, not understanding anything. It was utter confusion. "Calm down, for God's sake, Gita," I said, trying to bring order to that chaos. "Speak one at a time, or we won't understand anything." Percival went to get a glass of water for Willowdean, who looked like she might faint at any moment. I took little Bastian in my arms, trying to calm him as he had started to cry with all the commotion. Then, in one breath, Willowdean began to speak, the words coming out like a torrent. "Alaric Jr. and I are in love. I fell in love with him the moment I saw him, and he with me. We've been having a secret romance in the mansion. We couldn't tell his father. He would kill us." She paused, swallowing hard, and continued. "But today he caught us in bed. We were caught. We grabbed a few things and ran. The only idea I had was to ask for your help." Willowdean explained that they had grown careless. After months of secret meetings and stolen moments, they had become complacent. That afternoon, Alaric Sr. had returned home unexpectedly early from a business trip. He found them together in a way that left no room for innocent explanations. His rage had been immediate and terrifying. I felt my blood freeze. Good heavens, Kay, I thought. Any minute now, the man will be knocking at our door. Alaric Jr., who until then had been quiet, completed the story with a trembling voice. "Father didn't have time to see us leaving, but he was furious, shouting that he would kill us one by one." I stood there, trying to absorb it all. Percival beside me seemed like a statue, so motionless. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the soft crying of baby Bastian. Suddenly, the reality of the situation hit me like a punch. There they were, the young wife, the enamored stepson, and an innocent baby, all fleeing from a powerful and furious man. And I, a simple midwife, was their only hope at that moment. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. What should I do? Helping them would get me into enormous trouble. But how could I turn my back on them now? I looked at Percival, seeking some guidance in his eyes. He seemed as lost as I was. Then I took a deep breath and made a decision that I knew would change our lives forever. "All right," I said, trying to sound more confident than I really was. "You can't stay here. We need to think of a plan, and quickly. Alaric Sr. won't take long to discover where you are." That's when I had a somewhat crazy idea, but it was the only one that came to mind at that moment. "Let's go to my parents' house," I said. "There's no problem arriving at whatever hour. Mother is used to emergency calls at any time." They had a car, so we all went together. The journey never seemed so long to me. When we arrived, Mother opened the door, still in her nightgown. Seeing me with those rich people, her eyes widened with concern. "What have you gotten yourself into, Zephyrine?" she asked, her voice low and tense. I asked to come in. Mother was desperate, thinking it had something to do with the baby. After I said it didn't, she calmed down. I explained everything quickly, and shaking her head, she said this wouldn't work out. But I insisted. In the end, she gave in, though reluctantly. We left there in Mother's borrowed truck, leaving Willowdean, Alaric Jr., and the baby to spend the night. The journey back home was silent. Percival and I lost in our own thoughts. We had barely arrived home when the day began to dawn, and it was very early, with the sun barely risen, that we heard strong clapping at our gate. My heart leaped into my throat. We already imagined who it was. After all, Alaric Sr. knew that Willowdean was close to me. It was quite possible that ours would be the first door he would knock on. Percival and I looked at each other, fear stamped in each other's eyes. What were we going to say? "Zephyrine, Percival, I know you're in there." Alaric Sr.'s voice made us tremble from head to toe. At that moment, with my heart in my mouth and shaky legs, I knew I had to make a decision. What I said in the next few minutes could change the destiny of many lives, including mine. I took a deep breath, made the sign of the cross, and went toward the gate, praying for the Blessed Virgin to give me the strength and wisdom I so needed at that hour. He immediately said, "Your neighbor said my son and my wife were here last night. They confirmed it was his car." I nearly had a heart attack. I hadn't imagined I would be confronted that way. My plan was to deny it, but Percival came, saying, "They came here, yes, but we told them to leave." Alaric Sr. became furious with Percival. He said Percival should have kept them there at the house until he arrived. But then I didn't understand anything. If we had helped him, he would also find fault. It was a no-win situation, so we didn't say anything about what we knew. Percival asked Alaric Sr., as if he didn't know anything, what had happened. He didn't want to talk and didn't want conversation either. He left, accelerating and leaving us to eat dust. I stood there, watching the car move away, my heart still beating fast. I looked at Percival, not knowing whether to feel relieved or more worried. We had managed not to reveal Willowdean and Alaric Jr.'s hiding place, but now Alaric Sr. knew they had been at our house. Percival hugged me tightly and whispered, "Calm down, woman. We did what we could." But I knew this was far from over. Alaric Sr. wouldn't give up easily, and we were neck-deep in this story. I went into the house feeling exhausted, as if I had lived an entire week in just one morning. I knew I needed to warn my parents, tell them what had happened, and also needed to think about what to do from here on. How were we going to protect Willowdean and Alaric Jr.? And what would happen to us if Alaric Sr. discovered we had lied? Tell me, what would you have done? What decision would you take? Would you help the couple plan a new life far from there, or would you convince them to return and face Alaric Sr.? Your opinion is very important to me. At that moment, sitting in my kitchen with a cup of coffee trembling in my hands, I could only think one thing. My God, what have I gotten myself into? Percival went to work to avoid raising suspicions, and I went to my parents' house, my heart heavy, my legs shaky. Arriving there, I found Willowdean and Alaric Jr., both with deep dark circles under their eyes from not having slept at all. I told them about Alaric Sr.'s visit, about how he already knew they had been at our house. I saw fear grow in their eyes as I spoke. Then, With a slightly trembling voice, I said, "I can't hide you and put my family at risk." That's when I saw something change in Alaric Jr.'s face. He stood up, back straight, chin raised, and said, "You're right. What were we doing, involving more people in this lie we made? I will be a man and take responsibility for my actions." Willowdean let out a low moan, pressing little Bastion against her chest, but Alaric Jr. had already made up his mind. He knelt in front of her, kissed the baby's forehead, and then her lips in what seemed like a farewell. "I'm going to my father's house, Ka," he said. "I'm going to face the consequences of my actions." As I watched him leave through the door, I couldn't help but think about little Bastion. The truth is, there was no way to know if the boy was his son or Alaric Sr.'s, and perhaps we would never know. I stayed there beside Willowdean, holding her hand as we waited. The hours dragged on as if they were days. We didn't even know what to expect. Would Alaric Sr. forgive, or would it end in tragedy? We waited all day, time passing slowly. I stayed at Mother's house. I couldn't leave Willowdean alone in that situation. It was almost nightfall when Percival appeared. He entered the room with a worried face. "Alaric Sr. didn't come to work today," he said, his voice low and serious. It was as if an extra weight had fallen on all of us. Willowdean let out a muffled moan, pressing Bastion against her chest. My mother made the sign of the cross, murmuring a prayer. Father stood there, silent, but you could see the concern in his eyes. We all sat there in silence, hearts heavy. What could have happened? No one wanted to speak, but you could see everyone was thinking the worst. I felt a bad premonition eating away at me from the inside. But then Mother said, "Don't worry, bad news travels fast. It can't be anything serious." Willowdean asked what we should do now. No one responded immediately. Then Mother said, "We'll wait a little longer. If by early tomorrow there's no news, then yes, we'll think about what to do." At dinner time, the roar of an engine broke the tense silence. We all jumped from our chairs and ran outside, hearts almost coming out of our mouths. There was Alaric Sr.'s car, imposing and threatening, stopping in front of the house with high-beam headlights. You couldn't see inside the vehicle. The air was heavy. No one dared breathe. When the car door opened, it was as if time had stopped. But then, to everyone's astonishment, who jumped out was not the furious Alaric Sr. we expected, but Alaric Jr., with a smile so big it lit up the night. Right behind him came Alaric Sr. There was no anger on his face, no hatred. There was something I had never seen before, peace. It was as if a wave of relief washed over all of us. Alaric Jr. ran and took Willowdean and the baby in his arms in such a tight embrace that it seemed they would become one person. Tears flowed freely, but they were tears of joy. When we all entered the house, the air still charged with emotion, Alaric Sr. began to speak. But the words barely came out, and the man broke down crying. They were deep sobs from someone who had been holding back a lot for a long time. There, in that simple room, watching that powerful man cry like a child, I understood that I had witnessed a miracle of forgiveness, of love, of redemption. Alaric Sr. began saying, his voice choked, "Willowdean, my poor Willowdean, I ask your forgiveness. I now understand why you fell in love with my son. Alaric Jr. is a young man, handsome, full of life. And who am I but a foolish old man? You were a victim. I bought you, thinking I was doing you a favor, taking you out of poverty. I didn't count on condemning a girl to a life without true love." He paused, wiping the tears that ran down his wrinkled face. "Willowdean, with watery eyes, responded, "Alaric Sr., you don't deserve this. You have always been good to me, treated me with respect. I am the one who asks forgiveness for betraying your trust." Alaric Sr. shook his head, a sad smile on his lips. On the deathbed of Alaric Jr.'s mother, I promised I would take care of him and his siblings. I swore I would do everything so they would have the best life possible. And look what I did. I was so blinded by my own pain, by my loneliness, that I didn't see what was happening right under my nose. He turned to Alaric Jr., who was embracing Willowdean. "My son, I regret not having observed your intentions, your feelings. Perhaps if I had paid more attention, if I had been a better father, things wouldn't have come to this point." Alaric Jr., with tears in his eyes, hugged his father. "Father, you did the best you could. We were the ones who erred in hiding, in lying." Then Alaric Sr. thanked all of us. He told my parents how they had raised a good daughter and that I had chosen an even better son-in-law in Percival. They left, and Percival and I thanked my parents and also went home. I truly felt sorry for Alaric Sr. Imagine his pain. He loved his wife and decided to give up this feeling out of love for his son. The days passed, and I wondered what had happened to them. Percival went to work normally, but saw little of Alaric Sr. from a distance. It seemed nothing had changed, except for me. I noticed symptoms of pregnancy. I was expecting our first child. My heart almost exploded with joy when I told the family. It was a celebration. Percival stood there, staring at me with a foolish face, as if he couldn't believe it. My father and brothers were all happy, and Mother, Mother cried, hugged me, and then said something that kept hammering in my head. She looked at me with those eyes full of wisdom, took my hands in hers and said, "Daughter, you have seen many births, but experiencing one is different. You will feel each pain, each contraction in your own body. You will understand why women scream, why they squeeze their husbands' hands until they nearly break. And when you think you can't take it anymore, that it's impossible to continue, you will discover a strength you didn't know you had. Then, when you hold your baby in your arms for the first time, you will understand why mothers forget all the pain in an instant. It's as if the world stops, and only the two of you exist. Only then will you truly comprehend what each woman you helped felt, and that, my daughter, will make you an even better midwife." I kept her words with me. Life continued. I carried on with my work as a midwife, now with an even deeper understanding of the miracle of life. Sometimes when I passed near Alaric Sr.'s mansion, I found myself wondering how Willowdean, Alaric Jr., and little Bastian were doing. Had they managed to be happy after everything? Had Alaric Sr. truly forgiven them? The birth of my son was relatively easy, but even so, I felt tremendous pain. That's when I understood the reason for all the screaming in the births I attended. What terrible pain that is. I, who always thought women exaggerated a bit, discovered firsthand what they went through. Of course, it was my dear mother who delivered the baby, her first grandchild after all. We named him Remington. What a dream to be a mother. Before, I would leave the babies with their mothers, but now it was different. I stayed with the little one 24 hours a day, understanding for the first time what that constant responsibility meant. Every cry, every sigh from Remington made me jump out of bed, worried, and at the same time marveling at this new life that depended on me. The experience of childbirth and the first days as a mother completely changed my perspective as a midwife, just as my wise mother had said. Now I knew in body and soul what those women felt, the pain, the fear, the indescribable joy of holding your child for the first time. All of this made me an even better midwife, more empathetic and understanding. For a few months, I didn't attend births. I was enjoying my boy. Percival was a wonderful, caring father to Remington. Seeing him rocking the baby, changing diapers, and singing lullabies melted my heart. And my father surprised us. He, who was serious, now always laughed. He seemed like a different person. Even Mother found it strange. It was beautiful to see how little Remington had transformed that stern man into a silly, happy grandfather. During visits to my parents' house, my father would take Remington in his arms and spend hours playing, making faces, and telling stories we didn't even know he knew. Mother would watch with a smile on her face, as if she had discovered a new side to her husband after so many years. I found myself thinking about how life had changed so much in such a short time, from a single midwife to a family mother, all in the blink of an eye. The years passed, and we had 2 more boys, one right after the other. I had 3 little ones growing up together. The house was always full of noise and joy. The boys grew strong and mischievous, giving us work, but filling our lives with love. Percival and I wanted one more, to see if a girl would come, the dream of mine and Mother's, to continue the family tradition of midwifery. But God didn't want it. We had no more children, just the 3, Remington, Callan, and Everest. Theodora Yarrow, Percival's mother, wanted me to teach Percival's sister, Mariana, so she would have a profession. I tried. God knows how I tried. I took her with me to births, explained everything properly, but the poor thing would get sick and was more of a hindrance than a help. Every time she saw blood, she would turn as white as paper, and mind you, she was already a young lady of 16. In the end, we had to accept that being a midwife just wasn't for her. Even without a daughter to follow in my footsteps, I continued with my work. And wouldn't you know, when my brother Thornton's eldest daughter turned 13, she decided to watch a birth. The little rascal was brave. She decided to accompany her aunt, liked it, and I taught her everything. Our tradition was passed on to little Octavia Quill. Sometimes she would go with me, sometimes with grandmother. It was a joy to see her interest, her eyes shining with curiosity at each new learning. I even tried to get my boys to be midwives, but they laughed and said it was women's work. I thought it was foolish for them to think that way. Just look at how many obstetricians there are out there. But it was no use talking. They had it in their heads that it wasn't for them. Octavia, on the other hand, absorbed everything that grandmother and I taught her. She certainly had the gift, the delicacy with pregnant women, the calm manner even in the most difficult situations. Sometimes, watching her help with a birth, I saw myself young again, learning with my mother. The years passed, and Octavia became increasingly skillful. Soon she was doing some births on her own, always under my supervision, of course. The women in the region began to trust her as much as they trusted me and my mother. Seeing the family tradition continuing through Octavia filled me with pride. My boys, even though they didn't follow the profession, respected their cousin's work. Sometimes they even helped, carrying equipment or delivering urgent messages. It was beautiful to see how, even without wanting to be midwives, they understood the importance of what we did. Oh my goodness, let me tell you what happened. It seems like yesterday, but it's been so long. My Remington, that mischievous boy, was already 17 years old, and that's when the world turned upside down again. One day, Percival came home with such a sad face that it froze my heart. "Woman," he said to me, "Alaric Sr. has died." Good heavens, I was floored. That man who was once so important in our lives, whom we hadn't seen for years, had passed away. The factory was in mourning for 3 days, Just imagine. But what came after, that left me open-mouthed. About a week passed, and a well-dressed man with a briefcase knocked on our door. It was a lawyer, Dr. Beauregard Thackeray. He said there would be a reading of Alaric Sr.'s will, and that Percival and I had to go. I was very curious, and off we went. After so many years, entering that mansion again, my goodness, how nervous I was. Right away, who do I see but Alaric Jr.? He was older, of course, but still handsome. He took our hands very kindly, saying he was happy to see us. And Willowdean, good heavens, it seemed like time hadn't passed for her. She was a true lady. And Bastian, that baby I had seen born, was now a young man, taller and more handsome than his father. There were many people I didn't know. Must be family. Strangely, the only ones there were Percival, me, and the son of Lavinia Porter, that good maid whom God had already taken. When the lawyer began to read the will, good heavens, what a cold sweat. Alaric Sr. left something for us, but it wasn't just any little thing. First, he left an amount of money that already made our eyes widen. But what came next? Good heavens. Alaric Sr. left the Foxfire Luminary Company to Percival. That's right, you heard correctly. My Percival, who had worked there his whole life, was now the owner of the factory. You should have seen my husband's face. He turned as white as paper. He looked like he would faint right there. And me, I was trembling like a reed, hardly believing what I was hearing. But it didn't stop there. Alaric Sr. had also left a good house for Lavinia Porter's son. That man, in the end, really did have a good heart. The lawyer read a letter that Alaric Sr. had left. It said, "Percival and Zephyrine, you kept a secret that could have destroyed my family, but instead you helped build a new one. This is my way of thanking you for your discretion and kindness." At that moment, my daughter, I broke down. Tears flowed like a river down my face. Percival hugged me tightly. He was crying too. Afterward, Alaric Jr. came to talk to us. He said his father never forgot what we did, that he always spoke of our kindness, of how important we had been that night. And you know what else? That night changed not only their lives, but ours too. From one day to the next, Percival became a factory owner. Who would have thought? Life changed dramatically for us after inheriting the factory. Suddenly, we were thrust into a different social circle with new responsibilities and expectations. While the financial security was certainly welcome, I sometimes missed the simplicity of our previous life. There was something pure about being a midwife, just my hands, my knowledge, and a mother in need. The business world was far more complicated, with its meetings, paperwork, and politics. But Percival navigated it all with grace, and I continued my midwifery work, keeping one foot firmly planted in the world I knew and loved. A simple man like him, now responsible for so much. But he faced the challenge with his head held high, with the same honesty he always had. The employees liked him and thought it fair that he got the company since he had dedicated himself for many years. The community's reaction was mixed. Some were genuinely happy for us, stopping by with congratulations and small gifts. Others viewed our sudden change in fortune with suspicion, whispering behind our backs about what we might have done to deserve such generosity from Alaric Sr. The most difficult were those who had once treated us as equals, but now approached with deference, or worse, with hands outstretched, hoping for favors. Through it all, we tried to remain the same people we had always been, honest, hardworking, and kind. It wasn't always easy, but we managed to keep our feet on the ground, even as our circumstances soared. Look at that. I never imagined we would receive such an inheritance. It was completely unexpected for us. If you believe that our good actions in this world always come back to us in some way, write it in the comments. Whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. This passage from the Bible is in Galatians. Well, I continued being a midwife. Yes, this isn't just a profession. It's truly a calling. And one thing I tell you, I've lost count of how many lives these old hands have brought into the world. There were so many babies that I can't even count them. But there's one thing I never forgot, and it weighs on my heart to this day. I know exactly how many were stillborn. 131. It's a number that never leaves my head. And there were also the mothers who passed away before even holding their babies in their arms. 9, unfortunately. Each of those little ones who never got to cry left a mark on my memory. I remember the heavy silence that filled the room, the devastated look of the mothers, the tears of an entire family. They were moments that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. I would hold those tiny bodies, so small, so fragile, and pray for their little souls, asking God to welcome them into His arms, since they couldn't stay in their mother's arms here on earth. You know, each of those 131 little angels taught me something. They taught me about the fragility of life, about how we should value each breath, each heartbeat. They also taught me about the strength of mothers who, even in the deepest pain, found a way to move forward. And they taught me that sometimes a midwife's job is not just to bring life into the world, but also to comfort when life decides not to stay. I worked for a few more years, 38 years of dedication in total. It was less than my mother, God rest her soul. The poor thing worked for 49 years in this profession, a lifetime. But I'll tell you, there came a time when the body just couldn't take it anymore. I became very tired, my back hurting, my legs heavy. Then I thought it was time to rest a bit, and that's what I did. I began to enjoy that money Alaric Sr. left us. My old man, Percival, and I started to travel. Oh, how wonderful. We saw places I never dreamed existed. Each trip was a new adventure. But I always liked coming back home. Nothing better than our own bed and family. And that family grew like a well-tended garden. Today I have grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. It's nothing but joy to see all these children running through the house, making noise, filling everything with life. When I look back, I see that I had quite a life, full of ups and downs. It's true, but every moment was worth it. Each birth, each sleepless night, each fright, and each joy, all of it made me who I am today. As I reach the twilight of my life, I look back with gratitude on all I've witnessed and all the lives I've touched. Being a midwife wasn't just a profession. It was a sacred calling that connected me to the most profound moments in people's lives. When I look back on my life, I see that I have been blessed with more than I deserve. 131 little angels could not stay in this world, but thousands of other children have cried their first breaths in my arms. Each of those first cries is a sacred melody, a reminder of the miracle of life. You know, there are moments when my hands receive a tiny being, and I feel as though I'm touching the most sacred thing in this world. I wonder, have you ever had such a moment in your life? A moment when you felt you were doing exactly what God had intended for you. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night and wonder, where are the children I delivered now? How have they grown? How many have become parents themselves, and how many of their children were delivered by hands other than mine? Life is so short, my dear friend. Seek what makes your heart flutter, what makes you feel connected to something greater than yourself. And when you find it, hold on tight. I want to hear your story. What has shaped you? What has made you who you are today? Share with me, and let us remember that every story deserves to be heard. And if my story has touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories about life, love, and the small miracles that happen around us every day. Each time you subscribe, you extend our storytelling tradition, just as I continued my family's professional tradition.